Hello, hello, and welcome again to a Beatles podcast that we call Things We Said Today. This is a weekly show, a talk show in which we talk about anything that has to do with the Beatles. It could be any part of their history, about anything going on today. We could examine any of their works, their songs, their albums, you name it. I'm Ken Michaels. I'm one of the co-hosts of the show, also known from my other Beatles program called Every Little Thing, being joined by my regular co-hosts. First of all, the man who writes for Beatles Examiner and so many other Examiner columns, Steve Marinucci. Hi, Steve.
Hi, Ken. Hello, everyone.
Also, we have one of the writers for Beatle Fan Magazine, who was there since its inception many, many years ago. That being Al Sussman. Hi, Al.
Hi, Ken. Hello there, everybody.
And we also have our resident musicologist and freelance writer, also a writer for Beatle Fan, that being Allan Kozinn. Hi, Allan.
Hey, Ken, and hello, everyone.
And once again, we welcome another writer for Beatle Fan, who also is involved very much with the Fest for Beatle Fans and also with Joe Johnson's Beatle Brunch. We welcome back Tom Frangione. Hi, Tom.
Hey. Yay!
Hey! Rouse.
Throw money. No. Welcome, guys. Good to be back with you, especially since we have what I think is going to be a terrific topic to talk about.
Well, certainly since Tom has been on the show, he's been lobbying for this particular topic.
Did he pay us?
Not yet.
Well,
I would, but the pound is sinking.
Man, that man is ready for anything.
Oh man, he's loaded for bear tonight, kids.
Well, then we'll have to get it.
Yeah, get it.
Ooh.
There you go.
Ooh.
All right, so why don't we take it away?
Ooh, you're good. You're good.
Oh my God.
This is getting embarrassing.
What's that you're doing?
Oh no, it's not, Ken. It's my pleasure to be here today.
How are we going to work Ebony and Ivory into this?
Well,
You just
think
did
not
it.
as black and white as we always think.
If you haven't guessed already, we're going to talk about the Tug of War album. And this was an album that Paul released in 1982. It's generally regarded as one of his finest albums, although the reason why we have Tom on the show is because he rates this album not only as Paul McCartney's greatest album, solo album, but also as the very best solo Beatle album of all time. Now, I know that for those of us who followed my radio show in New Jersey, where I was on for 10 years at WDHA, many was the time I called the album the best album Paul has released. And certainly since then, I've maintained that it's one of his best. It actually it doesn't rank number one anymore for me. Sorry, Tom.
Yeah.
But we're going to find out why Tom feels this way. And certainly, it is generally accepted as definitely one of the best of Paul's solo career. But I'd like to start the conversation, obviously, with you, Tom, to find out what it is about this particular album. And Paul has made a lot of great albums in his solo career.
Yeah, whenever I throw that gauntlet down, people say, what do you mean? What about Band on the Run? You know what I dislike about Band on the Run? Nothing. That's a great album, too. I don't know. Tug of War, to me, just always seemed to be, to borrow a phrase, the one, like, you always knew he had in him. Top to bottom, it's immaculately produced, and we'll talk about whose hand was in there, George Martin. Actually, even in retrospect, as I think the album has aged just fine, we know through the unreleased recordings and things that circulate that there was enough material for a double album, and probably the first big W in the column for this album was, I think, paring it down to the very best material. Some of the stuff that was left over ended up on Pipes of Peace, which I enjoy, but is clearly not in the same league as Tug of War. It was clearly made up of a lot of leftovers. And I mean, it has some terrific songs on it that were even written after the Tug of War sessions. But the stuff that was held over, I think, was was a good judgment call on probably George Martin's part as producer, and the extra set of ears on the material. What's interesting is not a lot of people realize. I mean, everyone kind of, I think, associates it with its release date, 82. And, the fact that it was Paul's first album after John passed away, that's to say the first album as the Beatles are now officially never going to reunite, and they're officially now, the pages turn. They're now part of history as opposed to, maybe they're still going to be around and still thought of somehow collectively, even though they hadn't worked together in about a part of a decade. But most of that material that was on there, better than half the album, was written and recorded before John died. And I'm not going to rule out, John, mentioned, in more than one interview that coming up kind of, woke him up a little bit and said, wow, he's writing something that's pretty cool here, and the guy has a good groove, and, maybe Mac has found the edge again. And, somehow that would, reverberate with Paul saying, okay, as a confidence builder, that's pretty good to have, a guy who was always super critical of his work, to now start liking what he was doing. And a lot of the songs that were recorded in 80, are some of the best songs on the album. The ones that were recorded afterwards, clearly Here Today was recorded after 1980, stand just as strong. The material itself, I think some of the songs themselves stand up as great songs. And I think I look to no further than the recent Art of McCartney collection, which was, fun to listen to, had some really terrific, performances, and some that, sounded kind of like, Paul McCartney karaoke night. They have his band doing his arrangements, and it's just a different vocalist in there. But I think the strongest performance, was testament to the fact that a great song is a great song is a great song is a great song. And it was Wanderlust. Okay, fair enough. It was Brian Wilson, who I also love.
Yeah.
But the song, the structure of the song, the counterpoint in the lead vocals, the melody line sitting atop the chord changes is, it's somewhat classic in its structure, but his gift of melody just carries it, from beginning to end. The production with some of, and if we talk about Wanderlust, clearly, the brass arrangements sound very much like something Martin would have done with the Beatles. The string arrangements certainly in Here Today, reek of what he did with the Beatles in the middle period. And even, the cellos, that close out the title song, Tug of War, as it goes into Take It Away. Very, very Beatle-y in its sound without being so overtly Beatle-y, like, let's say a Mark Hudson production of a Ringo song where they are the lyrics and the, and everything right down to the melody line. The arrangements were done really, really well. And I think, Paul hooking up with George Martin was the first real big master stroke for doing this. It kind of, gets me thinking, you guys know, and certainly Al knows because I bounce all of these off of him. I'm a great fan of putting together, what if kind of collections and what we used to call in Beatle Fan Magazine DIYs. And said, if you look at the material that, 10 years in the rearview mirror now the Beatles were, if they just said, it's been 10 years, let's bring to the table what we've got. John's songs from Double Fantasy, I still think are among his best. The fact that they're in Paul's wheelhouse, singing about your wife, your kids, and life at home was kind of interesting. But, had John brought those songs and Paul brought what he brought for Tug of War, and remember, now George had written these maybe a drop earlier, but we didn't hear about them till somewhere in England in 81. But, some of the stuff they rejected for that, like Flying Hour, he brings that to the table.
Fantastic.
It's fantastic. The Beatle record that could have been in 1980. I mean, the Beatle record of 1971 has been done to death. Books
Yes.
about it, right? The Beatle record of 1980. Go try and put that together. Let me know how you do, because there are some great, very Beatle-y just by their definition and their composition are overwhelmingly Beatle-y. And I'll go, we've talked about John, Paul, George. How about Ringo?
Yes.
You take what he was, he was preparing his album, which became Stop and Smell the Roses, and you get a record like, him and Paul doing a cover. Okay, so it's not new material, but, that it's virtually a duet of them doing Sure to Fall, an old, a song the Beatles used to do on the BBC and in the clubs. And it's just a beautifully produced record by McCartney. Of him and Ringo, doing this old, very country western arrangement of Sure to Fall. And even some of the material Paul wrote around then for Ringo, like Attention.
Yes.
He was writing really, really well at that time. Beyond Here Today, which didn't make it into the live repertoire for some time, not till much later. He's not done really virtually anything from the album. The occasional, guest spot on Ebony and Ivory with if Stevie Wonder is around or crawling around a White House or something. But shortly after the album came out, he did a movie which we all know as Give My Regards to Broad Street. And say what you want about the movie. What I kind of felt at the time about that movie was it was kind of a pale substitute for him not having a band and going on tour.
Yeah.
It was the way he got some of his music, presented in a different way. And yeah, he drew a few from Tug of War, which was only a year or two old. Fair enough at the time. But I don't think he took anything from Pipes of Peace, did he?
Yeah, So Bad.
Oh yeah, that's right. So Bad is in it. But the way he paired up some of these songs, I mean, the big production number in the movie was Ballroom Dancing, and the George Martin / Ringo appearance early on. He put Wanderlust in amongst Yesterday and Here Today, and not Here Today. I hear it everywhere.
Yeah,
in a medley. I mean, so he, you can't imagine him putting, I don't know, Bip Bop in the middle of songs. But I think he held that song in high enough regard even then to say, this stands along, some of my best work. I think Paul has kind of held it in high enough regard on a lot of levels. The first time that the catalog was released in '93, all the albums came out with bonus cuts where they were available. So yeah, the first album didn't have any bonus cuts, but there were no B-sides and things like that to tack on, unlike they've done, in the archive series. But wherever there were B-sides, Paul tacked them on, whether they sounded in place or not. Tug of War, there were 3 B-sides. I'll Give You a Ring and
Rain Clouds,
and the solo version of Ebony and Ivory, and none of those ended up on there. And there was remember reading somewhere where he almost kind of passed it off and just said, that one was fine just as it was. And I'd have to agree with him. It was fine just as it was. And Ebony and Ivory placed there at the end of the album, which, was well known by the time the album came out. It had been a major hit. It kind of resolves the album, and brings it to a nice full, sense of closure. But even in '93, which now is more than a decade after the album originally appeared, he let that one stand on its own. And that, I think there's something to be said for that.
It's almost like the way the Beatles albums were treated. I mean, you could easily take a Beatles album and add the singles at that time and tack them on as bonus tracks. But the Beatles never did that. They kept it all separate. So,
right, but in the '93 series, I mean, he did this down to even Band on the Run. Now, what resolves better than Band on the Run? Okay, the big crescendo in 1985. In the very best Sgt. Pepper style, they come back and reprise the title track, close it out with Band on the Run. All of a sudden, Country Dreamer or something comes up. It's like, what is he doing here? It was so out of place. So out of place.
Okay, well, you certainly said a mouthful there, Tom.
Yeah. Okay, now it's your turn.
No. Before we get into this whole debate as to whether or not it's his best album, let's all just talk about our feelings about the album and whether or not we feel it's one of his best. I'm not just going to assume that because I feel that way and Tom feels that way. But let's just start with your impression of the album. How about you, Alan?
I think it's definitely one of his best. I wouldn't say his best necessarily, but what I like about it, and I listened to it again during the weekend because it had been kind of a while, and some of the songs had stuck in my mind much more than others over the years, and in a way didn't need to listen to them. But I like sort of refreshing the whole thing. There is so much going on this record. Carl Perkins turning up and Stevie Wonder. And even, it's funny, songs like Ebony and Ivory, which I don't know if I think I kind of liked it when it came out and then got kind of sick of it. Hearing it again, it's a pretty good song and it has a pretty good message. And I don't know. I don't. Maybe it was one of those things where at the time it was being overplayed or something, and or maybe I had seen the video so many times while dubbing copies for people. Whatever. I liked it this time, and I thought, maybe I had kind of misjudged it back then. Here Today, I think, is just a gorgeous song. Ballroom Dancing. It's hard not to picture the big production number, as Tom said, from Broad Street, and really I think was a highlight of Broad Street. I didn't loathe Broad Street as much as a lot of people did. I mean, I was well aware of its problems, which were many. But, as a bunch of Paul McCartney solo videos, fundamentally with a little bit of story stringing it together, I thought it was actually kind of fun.
Sure, like what they used to call a long form video, right?
Yeah,
right. And Ballroom Dancing was definitely a highlight of that. Pound is Sinking, could take or leave. Wanderlust, absolutely beautiful. Be What You See, again. It's a little bit like the Newtopian national anthem, except that you can hear it.
And I liken it more to "Can You Take Me Back" from the White Album. Has that?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Better.
That's better.
How very handy to have George Martin around.
Yeah. Yeah. So, there's an awful lot of good stuff on this record, and there's an awful lot of variety, which I think is one of its salient features because of, Get It and Ebony and Ivory and Ballroom Dancing. I mean, there's just so much here. And Take It Away. Like with Ballroom Dancing, think of the video with John Hurd and
Ringo.
George Martin's in that too, isn't he?
Yep.
Yes, he is.
Yeah.
I mean, that was on at the time. We're talking about sort of early MTV days, and that thing was on all the time, and didn't get sick of that one. Really thought that was a good track and a good video. So hearing the record again was a mostly pleasant experience. I mean, with the sole exception, really, of What's That You're Doing, which I thought was garbage. And I'm being polite because of Tom,
Easy.
Don't be polite, Alan. Say what you really feel.
Well, I mean, I don't know what our language restrictions are here, but you know which one I would. Yeah, it's like if you were to make an album with, Bip Bop and you needed 11 others to put on, this would definitely be on that record. Mm-hmm. For me. But, and it's funny because everything else on the album I thought was just fine and fun to listen to and good to become reacquainted with. And that one, I just couldn't wait till it was over. I mean, I didn't want to press forward because I wanted to listen to the whole album.
And you got to hear him do "She Loves You," yeah at the end.
Well, yeah, that's true.
Yeah, you got to hear that. Come on.
So basically, yeah, I think it's definitely one of his best. It's a very strong album, and I kind of actually like Flowers in the Dirt a little better, I think, and maybe some others, but it's definitely up there. It's definitely up there. If I could only take 3 or 4 or maybe 5 McCartney albums to a desert island or something, Tug of War would definitely be one of them.
That's fair.
Okay, very good. I think Tom will accept that.
I can live with it. I'd bring 3 copies of Tug of War. No,
well, that's another thing. I mean, I was reshelving. I'm still reshelving my collection because I just moved, and I must have 6 or 7 copies of it. Sure. Because there was the LP, of course, and then it came out on CD so many times, and I've gotten it each time. So just looking at the different spines, there was a yellow one, and there was the Columbia one, and my basic shelf copy now is the '93 one. Until, of course, sometime this year, I guess the boxed deluxe version will come out.
Well, that's going to be nice, that thing.
Yeah.
Boy, that's for sure.
But how are you going to feel, Tom, if Rain Clouds ends the CD instead of Ebony and Ivory?
Well, if the track record is anything to go by, all of the bonus stuff would show up on CD.
That's true.
And there is plenty of leftover material that didn't even make Pipes of Peace. There were a bunch of Give Us a Corduroy and You Don't Know Where She Came From and all those songs, which and God knows what else he's got that we haven't heard. Will probably be its own disc, is my guess.
Right. Okay. Who wants to comment next? How about Steve?
Why don't we go with Steve's?
Oh, okay. First of all, I should mention that while we are discussing this, Ebony and Ivory was #1 on the UK chart this week in 1982.
Yes, it was. Yeah.
So we've cut to the anniversary. This is very timely discussion. I agree. This is one of my favorite McCartney albums, and basically it's because it starts with the cohesiveness. It fits together so damn well. Starting with Tug of War. Tug of War just grabs you. I don't know how to describe it. I mean, it starts out slow, and he starts out, kind of gentle, and, with It's a Tug of War. You don't want me to sing it, but anyway, he starts singing it, and the whole arrangement just kind of draws you in, kind of like Al Pacino in Godfather 3. But it does. It just draws you in, and it flows one to the next so beautifully. Even What's That You're Doing? Even that the flow is just really, really good. The individual songs, there's Tug of War. Take It Away is wonderful. I really like Take It Away. Ballroom Dancing is probably one of my favorite moments in the movie because of the version they do. It's a great version, and it's just it's a great song. So I'm glad he used that in the movie. Here Today, raise your hands, guys, if Here Today kind of tugged at your heart there just a little bit the first couple times you heard it.
Of course.
Hands up.
Yeah.
I think that with everybody. It's a very it's one of the you almost expect to see Paul or to hear Paul's voice break on that one.
Well, you do when he does it live. That's
it sure has.
Right. But boy, that's just a beautiful song. I kind of wish those lyrics had something that had really, really happened. And it not had just been an imaginary conversation. It's such a great song. Pound is Sinking isn't bad. I like Pound is Sinking. Wanderlust, the same thing. The arrangement on Wanderlust is beautiful. I have to admit. Get It. I'm a longtime Carl Perkins fan. I love Carl Perkins.
Yeah.
Yes,
absolutely.
And for anybody, I think it's out of print, but worth hunting down is the DVD My Old Friend.
Oh yeah.
Where the two of them talk. And as a matter of fact, I just this past week picked up another copy of the Carl Perkins album,
Go Cat Go.
Go Cat Go.
Oh,
yeah.
And it didn't. And the copy I picked up had a different cover, and it didn't have the John Lennon track.
Really?
And I have never. Yes.
wow.
And I've never
seen a different cover, but I didn't know they changed or cut a track.
Maybe a licensing thing.
Maybe. I mean, we all know the Lennon track was him doing Blue Suede Shoes in Toronto.
And
so
Carl always cited that as his favorite version or his favorite cover version of that song.
Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, when I was sitting here going through doing the research for the show, I came upon an interesting quote. This is kind of not really connected to what we're talking about. He's talking about the Beatles in the studio with him in '64. Mm-hmm. He said they cut Blue Suede Shoes, True Love, and True Love at the same time. They did Matchbox and Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby and Honey Don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, can you imagine a Beatles version of Your True Love? Oh my God.
Oh man, well, I mean, just having George and Dave Edmonds do it at that time.
Exactly.
Right. Well, the only thing about that story is that Carl always that whole story about Carl being in the studio with them. If you remember the rockabilly session with George and Ringo, mm-hmm. he mentions it, and Ringo says something like, "That's what you tell everybody." So I'm not sure whether to believe that story, whether to actually believe that story or not. I mean, maybe he, the book I just read you from, he says it again. So maybe it's true, but it's interesting. That comment from Ringo, I've always remembered that. So yeah, I love the Paul McCartney Carl Perkins thing. Be What You Say, I'll agree with what Tom said. Yeah, that's a great little link track, like Wild Honey. Dress Me Up as a Robber. Nah, that's okay. It didn't really knock me over, but it didn't really hit me real hard. I love the solo version of Ebony and Ivory a little more than the Stevie Wonder Paul McCartney, because of the fact that we've heard that so much. But anyway, I do love this album. I really do, and it's I'm glad to see that he does Here Today, live. I think that's wonderful. I'd love to see him do ballroom dancing. That would be fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, there we go. My long-winded dissertation.
Before we talk to Al, just in case anyone doesn't know, you made a reference to Go Cat Go. And there is the possibility some of our listeners don't know what we're talking about here. So that was a CD that Carl Perkins released in the late 90s, I believe. And it's basically him teaming up with a lot of great people in the music industry. Willie Nelson's in there, Paul Simon, John Fogerty, a whole bunch of great people. And all four Beatles are represented on that CD.
Right.
You do have the Plastic Ono Band live version from Live Peace in Toronto, Blue Suede Shoes. You've got My Old Friend with Carl and Paul doing that duet. There is an amazing song, which I love to play on my show, which is one that George Harrison plays on, called Distance Makes No Difference with Love. An incredible ballad, which is wonderful. And you can hear George on backing vocals on there, and his slide guitar work. I was going to say the slide guitar work on that song is stunning. It's gorgeous. Yeah, so. And they also took a live version of Honey Don't from one of the all-star bands that Ringo was in, and they added Carl Perkins to the recording, so it was like a duet.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's pretty unique to itself that all four Beatles are on that CD. When does that happen?
Yeah, that's true. In fact, I got my copy courtesy of the other New Jersey resident in this grouping.
Yeah, that's a great record.
Yeah,
that is a great record.
Well, I was going to say there's that great film of George playing, is it Your True Love, at Carl's funeral?
Yes.
That is tremendous. It used to be on YouTube. I don't think it's there anymore, but I'm sure it's out there somewhere. But that's worth hunting down if you haven't seen it.
Yeah. So. And I just wanted to say, because we were just talking about the live concert of Carl Perkins and Friends, a rockabilly session, also called Blue Suede Shoes. Right. That is one of the most amazing live shows ever.
I often cite it as a top 5 post-Beatle moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, whether you count a concert or a TV appearance or an album or anything else, that is absolutely top 5 material.
Yeah, because that was when George came out of hibernation. I mean, he hadn't done anything for a long time before that.
Oh yeah, I mean, recording careers didn't get much deader than his was at that point.
Yeah,
it just didn't.
Right.
And he came out, he looked like $1 million.
Yeah,
he really did.
Oh, he did. Yeah, and I remember Olivia saying he was thrilled. He was absolutely thrilled to do it. So,
and he looked like a little boy observing the master on guitar. It's just so funny to watch that. But the performance of Your True Love, which Tom was just talking about, is one of the greatest live moments ever from any of the Beatles, because you've got Carl Perkins, George Harrison, and Dave Edmunds all sharing lead vocals.
Yeah.
It's one of the greatest moments. If you've never seen it before, I'm sure it's on YouTube. Look at it. It's just wonderful.
It's on CD and DVD. It's been released.
Commercially released.
Right. It's been commercially released, so you can get it.
And I'm pretty sure much of it is on YouTube as well.
Yeah,
I'm sure it is. There are outtakes too. There are outtakes.
Yeah.
I remember that there was outtakes of like a separate taping of it.
Yeah.
In which Carl gives George the same introduction, saying, well, people say he's retired, and that's not what I've heard, something like that.
Well, there's a great clip. It was from one of the news outlets, CNN or something, where they were promoting the show, and the mutual admiration, like pretty much all the clips they used were kind of Harrison and clapped and, like grinning like holy crap, there's Carl Perkins. And they cut to George and they said, what's it been like? And he says, I offered him a cigarette. And he said, do you mind if I don't smoke it and keep it as a souvenir? And it blew me away, like, that he would do that. Because Carl is his hero. He goes, it's always great to meet your heroes. So that's a funny story.
Yeah. All right, Al, your take on the Tug of War album.
Funny thing, one song that nobody has mentioned thus far is Someone Who Cares.
Oh, my God.
And
Somebody Who Cares.
Somebody Who Cares, I'm sorry. And that which is an absolute earworm. I can see myself probably tomorrow morning, I'll have suddenly realized I've been humming that to myself in my sleep all night.
Oh, yeah.
Because I hadn't heard it in a long time because I just listened to the album not long before we started taping. And it really holds up. The one thing that I like particularly about the album, and Steve actually kind of clued in on that, is its consistency. Because there's a problem with Paul's work in the 70s that I always had, is that much of it, either from album to album or even sometimes from song to song on the albums, he was all over the place stylistically. And even going from the simplicity of McCartney to the kind of glossy sheen of Ram to the very stripped down Wildlife, and back again on Red Rose Speedway, and on and on. Same kind of thing, and especially with all the different lineups of Wings and all, there was just something, just a maddening type of inconsistency to his work in the 70s. And this one has, a great deal of consistency, of cohesiveness, as Steve said. And of course, that's, that can be laid at the feet of one man, and that's George Martin, who obviously Paul had not used, except for Live and Let Die. Paul had not used at all in the 70s. And he gives, even though, again, stylistically, there's a lot of different types of music here, it has a cohesiveness that much of Paul's work in the 70s didn't have. And as I've said before here, I'm a song person. So, and the songs on here are almost uniformly wonderful. Take it away, as Alan said. That really does harken back to those early days of MTV when they didn't really have that many videos, and so the ones they had, they would play a whole lot, and that was one of them. But it was a great video, and it's a great song. And Wanderlust is obviously one of Paul's finest songs, and yes, the fact that he thought enough of it that to include it in a medley with Yesterday and Here, There, and Everywhere in Give My Regards to Broad Street, I think gives an idea of the quality of the song, and plus the fact that and actually the version he does there almost tops the one that's on Tug of War. Yeah. And as far as Ebony and Ivory, I won't start the rant that I've that I've gone on so many times before about the fact that you absolutely never hear this song on the radio any longer. Possibly because it's too social commentary-ish. But I'll tell you one thing, considering the atmosphere in this country right now, with this seeming war between blacks and police and all, I think we could use a little Ebony and Ivory right about now. It's a song that I've always absolutely loved, either version. And it was a huge hit record, and it's in fact it was in terms of chart performance, it was actually the biggest hit of Paul's post-Beatles career. And it's but overall the album itself just holds together so well. And again, I think that's a tribute to the production work of George Martin.
Sure.
Okay. Well, some wonderful comments here, and I'm hearing all this, and my mind is going off in a million different directions. We can go into so many different topics from a lot of what you said here, but my overall impression is that this is definitely one of the finest of the solo Beatle albums. Like everyone has been talking about consistently, I do think that there are a lot of albums before Tug of War that were consistently strong throughout. Certainly Ram, in my opinion, was, and Band on the Run, and Venus and Mars, and Back to the Egg, I thought was extremely very strong, consistently strong album. Tug of War, I love the production on it, and who's going to argue what George Martin has done for Paul and for the Beatles? Mm-hmm. He was the ideal man to call on, and certainly at this particular time, I think, Tom, you were saying this, all eyes were on Paul. People were waiting. Yeah. People were waiting to hear what he had to say, especially right after John died. This was his first album after John.
Well, even for those who are listening that read the Beatle fan blog page, the Something New blog, there's actually a link in there that we put in there to a review of what I called then relevant Rolling Stone.
Right.
You got a 5-star, album review back then. It kind of meant something.
Mm-hmm.
What, but it meant something. But also, in light of the perceived carrying of the torch that they anointed themselves with as the torchbearers for Saint Lennon, and never having really been too kind to Paul in the past. I'm not saying they were licking their choppers, but they were going to look at this and not pull any punches. And
Mm-hmm.
fortunately, they didn't pull any punches. I think they cited it as head and shoulders above anything in his catalog to that point, including Band on the Run. And so, it was kind of I think like what my father always used to hear when when the teachers would call home, they'd say, "This is we know he can do it. He just doesn't ever really pull it off. We know he's capable, and that's seemingly the more Manning part." And Al, actually, you hit on it. I think you hit it right on the head. If you look at the '70s for Paul, those early Wings singles and things, he's kind of all over the place. You got, Give Ireland Back to the Irish, and then Mary Had a Little Lamb, and then it's High, 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 then it's something else, and it's uneven.
Mm-hmm.
The albums tend to be uneven. That changes, admittedly, by 73 or so with Band on the Run.
Mm-hmm.
He definitely earns his stripes. I mean, you can't deny that record. But even after that, some of the albums, Venus and Mars has a couple of up and down moments. London Town, which I love that album. Back to the Egg, which I love, viewed dispassionately and from a little bit of distance. I could look at Back to the Egg now and say, this is the A material and this is the B material. And to your point, Al, about consistency and the songs all being good,
Mm-hmm.
I really don't see any B material in Tug of War, and that,
No.
Alan, unfortunately, includes What's That You're Doing. I like that record. It's funky enough, and by the way, at that point, you got to remember where Stevie Wonder was. Anything he touched was turning to gold. I mean, to say he was on a roll, the Music Aquarium was out, and anything he touched was turning to gold.
Right.
Unlike Paul's next partner of that era, who he started collaborating with right after that. So it's not because they were hooked up with Paul, but to say that he got them when they were hot would be an understatement.
Yeah.
We're talking, of course, about Michael Jackson. I like that record. It's kind of cool that Paul's playing that funky drum stuff in there. I like that. I love the here before I was saying, boy, it's not like Mark Hudson and their Cop and Beatle lyrics, but yeah, at the end when they sing "We Love You," yeah, I thought was kind of a nice nod, because at that point, remember, they weren't doing really any nods back to the Beatle days.
No.
That would be hard to find on a record at the time.
Yeah.
So it's I like that right in the middle. Stylistically. Yeah, he's got the the acoustic ballads, he's got the big piano ballads, he's got the rockers, he's got the string section stuff. he's got a little bit of everything, including that funky record right there in the middle with What's That You're Doing. So, top to bottom, there are only a couple of them that, a couple of albums that I would say really don't have anything but A-grade material. This is one of them. The songs, even the ones that at the time, if we go back in the mists of time, as Paul says, at the time you would hear Ballroom Dancing on the radio. You would hear certainly Tug of War. You would hear certainly Take It Away. You would hear a lot of that material. There were a few I don't think I ever heard outside of on a show like Ken's or a specific Beatles show. I don't think The Pound Is Sinking or Be What You See or Dress Me Up as a Robber were big airplays. But you know what? When you listen to those, these are these little pastiches of this flamenco guitar in there and then some power chords, and you say, this is kind of like the stuff he was doing on the White Album. Mixing all the different types within one song. I think getting him out of his comfort zone, that's to say where he writes the material, sings the material, produces the material, chooses the material, arranges the band, and calls all the shots, having a separate set of ears and saying, Denny can play a little on here, but you know what? We're going to get Steve Gadd in here. We're going to get Stanley Clarke in here. Okay? Right. We're going to get people who are your caliber in here. I think was brazen. Paul, I wouldn't have seen Paul doing that on his own. If he was calling in other players, he'd bring in Eric Stewart or someone like that, but never anyone who you would consider the top of what they do. So Steve Gadd at the time is making every Paul Simon and Steely Dan record sound way better than they ever would have without him. Exactly. Right? And having him on a Paul McCartney record, that's kind of cool. Him and Ringo playing side by side, two completely different schools of drumming. Having them together, I think worked magically.
Well, you raised a lot of good points here, Tom, and I agree with you on most of what you said. I very respectfully disagree with your assessment of a lot of Paul's solo work. And I don't think it's as inconsistent as you say. I do think, I don't really see really low moments in Venus and Mars and Back to the Egg and those albums, and Ram to me is a masterpiece too. But I will say Tug of War to me really song per song is really strong. I'm a huge Stevie Wonder fan, so when I first heard that Paul and Stevie Wonder were working together, I don't think there was anyone on the planet that was happier about it than me. And I was thrilled when Ebony and Ivory came out. I loved the song instantly. I still do. To bring up this point about not playing it on the radio anymore, I think overall, radio these days, commercial radio, what they do play, that is older material, is so selective. Yeah. And most of Paul's poppier stuff gets dismissed. You don't really you'll never hear With a Little Luck all that much on the radio, or A Good Night Tonight for that matter. I hardly ever hear silly love songs, but you still hear Band on the Run, and you still hear Jet, and you still hear Live and Let Die, and you still hear Maybe I'm Amazed. You don't really hear the lighter stuff that Paul has done over the years. So Ebony and Ivory, Take It Away, you're not going to hear those songs anymore.
Plus,
the songs,
plus it's at least outside of Beatles shows, you're not going to hear, time-wise, an album from the early '80s is something that most radio stations now will just simply not play because it's too old, for the desired demographic. Now so many, AC and hot AC stations now are only playing, if they play any 90s at all, that's as old as they'll get. They'll play things from the 90s and then the 2Ks and this decade, and that's it. So an album from 1982, they're not going to touch, and even classic rock radio, probably wouldn't touch an album like this anymore. Unfortunately, very unfortunately.
Yeah. But a few things I want to bring up about the album. But What's That You're Doing, I've always loved. All these years later, I must admit, it might be one of the lower points of the album, only because I feel, not that I don't love the song, I think it goes on a little too long. It's over 6 minutes long.
I'll allow that it's the 12th best song on the record. How's that?
But like Steve was saying, the songs flow really well. Tug of War going in to Take It Away was,
Oh my God, that is beautiful.
Yeah.
it was so perfect. And Somebody Who Cares, thank you, Al, for bringing that up. It's another one of those gems of Paul's ballads. Paul has a habit of, he likes to put ballad songs like in the middle of side one somewhere. If you notice that, he just seems to, there is a formula there somewhat in his albums, and he likes to put a love song somewhere in the middle of side one. Here Today is brilliant, no doubt about it, really heartfelt. And even recently, Paul was asked what his favorite songs are of his solo career, and he rarely ever even talks about it. He doesn't like to assess his own work too much. But, he did point out, apart from Maybe I'm Amazed, that he really is proud of Here Today. And that is a good reason, apart from the fact that it is a tribute. But he is still doing that song every tour since 2002.
Not only that, but one thing that he should really be given credit for is the fact that a couple of live versions of that song in which he basically very nearly goes down the chute emotionally.
Oh, yeah.
He has actually released. One of them was on the DVD of Good Evening New York City.
Field, yeah.
Right, from City Field. And the other one was his appearance at Amoeba Records in L.A., where I don't know whether it was because he saw Ringo in the audience or whatever, he absolutely went down for the count.
Right.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Just a few more things about the Tug of War album. Ballroom Dancing, I've always called, since the very beginning, the greatest single that never was. It really should have been a single, probably the follow-up to Take It Away. Some people might think it should have been the second single ahead of Take It Away. But everything about that song is so perfect. The vocals, oh my God, Paul's vocals are just spot on. The arrangement, the brass, everything. I mean, it was just, it's a perfect recording from start to finish. The Pound is Sinking is one of those songs. There are certain songs throughout the Beatles' history where you've got song fragments and you string them together. And like Uncle Albert Admiral Halsey is one of those great examples, or Band on the Run. And actually, Happiness is a Warm Gun is one of those songs where you've got three different songs, you string them together, and somehow they make sense.
Oh, look at Band on the Run.
I was just saying that,
Yeah.
But The Pound is Sinking to me is one of those songs, and I love how his voice screams towards the end. There is that build-up that gets to that. And I love that song. No problem with that one. Wanderlust is a masterpiece. And one of the things that I love about Wanderlust, and unfortunately, I mean, Paul has done this a lot throughout his solo career, but he hasn't done it all that much recently, is he has counter melody in that song.
Oh, my God. So nice.
Yeah.
He's got,
so nice.
For people that don't know, counter melody is having two melodies or more at the same time. You can certainly hear that in Silly Love Songs. She's Leaving Home has that. Two different vocal lines going on or more at the same time. It's just, an incredible piece of music, Wanderlust. And again, who better to have to arrange the horns and everything than George Martin?
Right.
Get it? I love the duets that Paul does because his vocals work so well with other people. Be What You See, I kind of agree, is like, Can You Take Me Back? Or I even was thinking of Wild Honey Pie, just a link to go to the next song. And I really love Dress Me Up as a Robber. I think it's a quirky little number, and the Spanish guitar part reminds me a bit of Goodnight Tonight in that regard.
Sure.
And Ebony and Ivory is the perfect song to close with. I think that Paul and Stevie are just a natural duo. They sound great vocally together. The melody line is just perfect about Ebony and Ivory. I really wish that song would be brought back more on the radio. It really deserves it. The only thing, apart from I wish What's That You're Doing would be a little bit shorter, and this is a problem that I have with Flowers in the Dirt as well, which is actually my favorite McCartney album now.
Is that right?
It is. Tug of War lacks a rocker. Ballroom Dancing is an up-tempo song, and I love it to death, don't get me wrong, and I love the ending of The Pound is Sinking, but it needs to rock a little bit. The same thing with Flowers in the Dirt. It had Figure of Eight, which I love the song, but it's, the live version of Figure of Eight is stronger than the studio version.
Single even is better than the album version.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it has a guitar solo,
Yeah.
But every now and then, you wish there was just a real kick-ass song on the album, and Tug of War doesn't have that. But when it comes to impeccably produced pop, Tug of War is amongst the finest that there is, and so I definitely would rate it amongst the best. But and something that you were saying, Al, and also Tom, talking about the 70s, Paul, you're going to have a great debate out there between people, especially the ones who grew up on Wings in the 70s period, who favor that period more than post-Wings.
The Ram Army.
The Ram Army.
Yeah.
It's not just that, but there are people out there that really love the 70s, Paul, and the people who feel that he lost a lot of edge. Maybe he needs to be in a band more. He does his best work with a band as opposed to working with different people. That's a whole other debate as well. But
look,
like you were saying, Tom,
I'm one of them guilty ones. I'm a Wings nut. I love them, and part of what I like is that it's so diverse. But when you go to assess the catalog, in its entirety, and say which parts stand on their own, I think what makes some of his singles great is that you get a rocker on one side and a little country thing on the other. Even the albums, that you get this whole cornucopia, but to get something, I think Al used the term cohesive. Something that kind of stands as a unique body of work. I think this one stands, stronger than anything he did in the 70s.
One of the things that I love most about Paul is that musically he is amongst the most eclectic artists that are out there. So Tug of War is an album that displays that. He's done a lot of that throughout his solo career. So there's really no difference. In fact, I think he's been far more experimental after Wings than during the Wings period. I think there was more of a formula that he had to keep with it being a band. But, Tug of War was a good example, although McCartney, too, he was experimenting a lot. But here he has all these different styles of music, and they're all strong. All the songs are strong for the most part. Yeah. So, that's where I think consistently comes into play. But I do love the ones that I mentioned from the 70s, if you're talking about prior to this. Yeah. So you were going to say, Tom?
Yeah, so while he's not set any precedent with this, we know that this Tug of War archive release is coming. I haven't heard even an estimate of a street date, but we can assume it's this year. And he is on the road. Now, I know when I remember when Ram came out in the archive series, people said, wow, maybe he's rediscovered them all and he'll play Monkberry Moondelight or Uncle Albert finally, right?
Right, nothing.
And we got nothing. Nothing. If he immerses himself in Tug of War and kind of refamiliarize himself and said, I kind of like this and maybe I should air a little bit out. Okay, well, he's already doing Here Today, so that's out of the mix. And let's face it, it ain't going to work with Brian Ray doing Ebony and Ivory.
Maybe Abe Laboriel.
Maybe. I think that's too much of a Paul and Stevie song.
Hamish Stewart. Hamish Stewart sang it with him.
Yeah, it was terrible. Terrible.
Whoa.
Terrible. Just terrible.
Maybe Kanye will turn up.
Yeah, maybe Kanye will turn up. So we'll get the filthy version of Ebony and Ivory. But what if he had to pull one, what would you say would be the front runner if he says, fill this one in? Hey, we've been remixing all the albums and putting them out in the archive series, and everybody goes, yay. And he says, and the new one that's out is Tug of War. And here's one that we never played before. What would it be?
Wanderlust.
Ballroom Dancing.
Ballroom Dancing.
I'm gonna go Wanderlust.
I would want it to be Ballroom Dancing, but I think he might want to do Take It Away.
Yeah,
I know he's very fond of that song, and I could probably hear Wicks do the horn arrangement on the keyboard since he doesn't have, a horn section with him. But I prefer for it to be Ballroom Dancing. But I certainly wouldn't mind if he did the title track to Tug of War.
Yeah, sure.
Can I interject something here?
Sure.
I disagree with you about the fact that there's not a kick-ass song on the album. I think Ballroom Dancing is it.
I'm saying as a rocker. I think of Ballroom Dancing as a great pop song that's up-tempo and is arranged perfectly. I'm talking more guitar-oriented, really rocking kind of a song, like a Jet, like a Helen Wheels. like a Venus and Mars rock show, like one of those songs. That's what I'm thinking more in terms of rockers, or material like from Back to the Egg. I'm talking about that kind of rockers.
I think vocally it's quite a rocker. If he does his Long Tall Sally voice on Ballroom Dancing, I think that makes it a real rocker. I think, and the way he did it, the way he somewhat did it in the movie, I think he really took it to a different level.
Well,
there we go.
You can take a lot of his songs, and when he does them live, they have a lot more of an edge to them.
Yes.
So, I mean, Venus and Mars Rock Show is I love the studio version, don't get me wrong, but there's a lot more of an edge when you listen to Wings Over America of a song like that.
Virtually song that he did from, I think, from Venus and Mars, and especially from Speed of Sound, I think sounded way better live.
Yes.
Yeah, I've always pointed out "Letting Go" as a standout live song.
Yeah,
one of the finest.
Call Me Back Again. I mean, geez. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. So I think, live Ballroom Dancing would rock. I think it would really fit very well as a live song.
Okay.
But you know something, and I know we want to end this conversation because we are up to an hour. But you did say that you think, Tom, that this is not only Paul's best solo album, but the best solo Beatle album. You're going to have a real strong debate on that from all Beatle fans, really, because there's so many other great from the other Beatles, too.
Well, and there has to be one, right? One. Okay, if there has to be one, to me, this is it. You know what's wrong with All Things Must Pass? Nothing. You know what's wrong with Imagine? Nothing. What's wrong with Band on the Run? Nothing. They're all fantastic albums in so many different ways.
Right.
I mean, to me, this, from top to bottom, the one that I could listen to without, to borrow a phrase from Alan, having some urge somewhere to hit the forward button. Where would I hit the forward button on the Imagine album? I'm not sure I would, but one day one of them will get to me. It'll be, I don't know. I don't want to be a soldier. I don't want to.
Yeah, there you go.
If that's my 10th favorite song off Imagine, guess what? It's still very much in place and a very good part of a very, very, very good album. All Things Must Pass. Which version are we talking about? The one with the live jam or without it? Okay, the live jam thing, nice to have, love it, like having it's Johnny's birthday and the pepperoni and all that nonsense. But but boy, as a double album, wow, incredible. As a triple album, wow, incredible. Yeah, and by the way, rounding out that top 10 is a bunch more Paul albums too.
Sure.
Absolutely, we've talked about Band on the Run and certainly Ram. In that top 10 somewhere in that sauce, I've got probably Chaos and Creation in the Backyard. Love that.
Absolutely.
Another cohesive album. I don't think the songs are as strong top to bottom as Tug of War, but it's still a very, very solid album.
Yeah.
You were mentioning Flowers in the Dirt before, Ken. I've always, since it came out, which I can't believe now is 25, 26 years, something.
26 years.
I've always felt that album had some of his very, very, very best songs on it. And then it had a bunch of things where you don't want to be in between me and that forward button. Okay. And there are a few of them that I give one as an example. We Got Married. I just think is a total throwaway song.
I love that one.
Even
That's
one of the Costello songs, the You Want Her Too, is just it's so contrived, and it's so not as good as the other Costello songs.
Yeah.
How about Ue La Sole? It's the same kind of.
But some of the very best ones that are on there, I think a song like That Day Is Done, I think is solid a song as he ever wrote or co-wrote, as the case may be.
I have to admit, I didn't like We Got Married very much until I heard him do it live.
Yeah, that was another one that improved on the 89-90 tour.
Right.
On the studio version. Yeah.
Right. So.
No, I mean, and to me, that was a very, to me, uneven. The highs were so high.
Yeah.
And to me, the lows were really, I said, this is the kind of stuff people dismiss him for. That was my own take on Flowers in the Dirt. But the songs that are really good, are just exquisite on that album.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I think perhaps we could do a show on what we feel is the greatest solo Beatle album and bring Tom back, and then we can debate the other ones that he was mentioning. I'm sure there are plenty of fans that think that All Things Must Pass deserves to be number one. There's a lot of other McCartney albums, like you said, Tom. There's a number of ones from John. We were just doing a show on Mind Games, and, know, Al said it was, to him, the most consistently strong album from his solo career. So,
and we still haven't mentioned the Ringo album.
Sure, Ringo.
That's right.
And what's kind of weird is, and Al has written a couple of pieces for this, as of some of the other Beatle fan writers for the Something New blog, where we are basically just in no particular order, just picking ones we think folks should revisit. Al did a very thoughtful piece on Flowers in the Dirt, almost apologetic that his initial reaction to it was less than thrilling.
Yeah.
And what's kind of interesting is when you see the feedback. So okay, there's going to be a few trolls out there that are just going to dismiss whatever they read. But the reaction to the Tug of War one literally ran from, okay, Tom, this is just your sentimentality talking. The album must have had some particular place in your life, and it's not that great an album, up to people who said, wow, finally, somebody got this album the way I did. I think this is the best record, too. And everything in between, and then the more balanced ones. Hey, this is a great record, and people should hear it. Is it up there with All Things Must Pass and Imagine and Plastic Ono? Maybe, maybe not. But that's what makes it what it is. That's what makes the blog what it is we express the opinion. Again, the trolls who have nothing better to say, what are you smoking? And, you probably voted for Obama. And they're all over the place.
And not only that, Tom, but I just think that it's only natural with, well, I hope most people, that opinions change through the years.
Oh,
and
is that true?
No, I'm always consistent.
Yeah.
There could be an album that you dismissed when it first came out, and now you listen to it 10 years later, 20 years later, and you say to yourself, this wasn't so bad. And likewise, there might be albums that you thought highly of that you're not as fond of now. And that's just the nature of people, and also how they can relate as they get older to certain albums too. So nothing ever stays the same, and nothing ever should stay the same.
Well, I agree with you that, the revisiting, something that you did have some kind of soft spot or touched you in just kind of a way that was really good, and then now you say, well, that was all right. Or other way around, something you never really gave much thought to that now you say, wow, this is really good. Mm-hmm. My punchline to this story is, the very first time I listened to Tug of War, got home, put it on under headphones, and not unlike most albums, you expect that you'll have some initial reaction, but many times, I think, Ken, you've cited this many times on your show, when Paul puts out an album, it takes you a few times to kind of get it, to kind of take it all in. I got to tell you, from the very first time I listened to that record, I remember when Ebony and Ivory shut down, sitting there between the two speakers with the headphones and just sitting there, jaw on the ground, saying, oh my God, that was unbelievable. Mm-hmm. And I have never wavered from that feeling. I've never gotten halfway through that album and said, you know what, where's my copy of Living in a Material World? Where's my copy of, Gone Troppo or Stop and Smell the Roses? I put that thing on. It's a 45-minute commitment. And I never even pop it on and just say, ooh, you know what I want to hear? I want to hear The Pound is Sinking. I don't think literally in 32 years, 33 years, there's been very much of that. To me, that's always been a start to finish beautiful piece of music.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Ken, by the way, Tom just mentioned Living in the Material World, and if I'm not mistaken, that's your all-time favorite solo Beatles album, isn't it?
It's my favorite album from anyone.
All time.
Yeah. So
whether they were in the Beatles or not.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, there's no doubt that the Beatles as a group put out so many masterpieces, and I don't want to argue with that, but they put out a lot of great ones on their own that deserve a lot of attention. And I think Living in the Material World, despite the fact that it went to #1 when it first came out, the album, it's kind of neglected now. And I love it because I love the spiritual side of George. And even though he's got spiritual songs throughout a lot of his solo albums, I think the most powerful to him and the most personal to him, you can't touch Be Here Now. Be Here Now, in terms of the message of what he's saying in the song and the way he's delivering it, is just so powerful. The fact that every word is said like it takes up a whole measure. Yeah. It's so slow. It's driving the point home. It's like a mantra. It's just incredibly powerful. But, you know, all the other songs, The Light That Has Lighted the World, Who Can See It, he's saying how he feels about his place in the world at that time, and people aren't really getting him. That's very, very personal. And certainly a lot of the songs on All Things Must Pass were. But I just think that because those songs and the melodies and the arrangements and his incredible guitar work, I really love that album to death. That Is All is one of the greatest love songs ever written, despite the fact that most people don't even know it. Yeah. You know, except for the hardcore fans that follow all the solo music. You know, it's just it really is from start to finish a great album. But I'm not going to argue with anybody that says Tug of War or Band on the Run or All Things Must Pass or Ringo, whatever. Yeah. If that's your favorite, then God bless you.
Well, you know, that's the point you made before, Ken, about, you know, revisiting those. I remember, you know, 30 some odd years ago when we first met, and you're on DHA, and Al and I used to come down there, and at the time, you know, you were reading from that, you know, from that gospel, saying, you know, this is the greatest Beatles, you know, solo Beatles record, my favorite record by anybody. And I remember thinking, you know, hey, I like it enough, but I wouldn't have been in my top 10 even. And in recent years, for any number of reasons, I have rediscovered that album. You know, it was the reissue that came out on CD, you know, to go rediscover it. Frankly, you know, having done a couple of interviews to help Gary write with promotion of his book, you know, discussing some of the songs with him and asking him what some of his favorites were, and I said, let me go chew on those again. I mean, I know them, but I'm just not sure they would have ever been in my top, fill in the blank, 5, 10, whatever. But now, Be Here Now, if I were making my top 10 Harrison songs, you can bet that's in there. You can bet on that. It is a wonderful, wonderful song. I mean, it's immaculately sung, immaculately played, well written. It's a whole bunch of good adjectives. It just is.
In a lot of ways, that particular song, to me, it's George's Within You, Without You of his solo career. It's slow. It has a powerful message to it. You know, it's just, you know, it's what he's saying with that song that really hits you hard. If you, you know, if those words mean something to you. Yeah. So,
I mean, to me, that album for many, many years, obviously the hit, Give Me Love, and, you know, Don't Let Me Wait Too Long, another single that never was.
Right.
And even the title.
Shouldn't this be another show?
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say we have 2 nominees already.
Yeah.
Well,
so we should do a Living in the Material World show. You know, as a separate show.
Or the each of our favorite post-Beatles albums.
Well, I mean, in light of tonight's conversation, I guess the show should just be called "What's the Second Best?" Song?
Yeah, well, yeah, right. Or in your case, just have.
I think we made the case for tonight, right?
Yeah.
There we go.
But, you know, just a closing thought here, and that is, I was just talking about how impressions change over time. There may be Beatles albums as a group that you appreciate more now than you did before. Maybe Sgt. Pepper always was your favorite, and now it's Revolver or the White Album or something like that. I love talking about that because that can change over time for whatever the reason. And we can bring into focus why that is.
You want to know the reason? You want to know the reason?
You want to know the reason?
The reason. I'll tell you the reason. Because it's too much trouble. That's why. We had to get it in there somewhere.
Absolutely.
Come on.
That's right.
Yeah.
And obviously, well, I mean, Alan hasn't mentioned that his favorite solo Beatle album is
Life
with the Lions. That's right. I'm sure that'll be in the conversation when we talk about our favorite solo Beatle albums.
Yet it's
But
not
anyway.
the worst of all solo Beatle albums. Life with the
Oh,
Love.
that's another show. Another show. Let's save all this for another show.
Okay.
Sounds good.
So this
Sounds
has been so much fun talking with you, Tom, and talking about the Tug of War album. And if any of you would like to get in touch with us, you can do so by writing to us by email at our address, which is thingswesaidtoday@gmail.com. Also, be sure to like us on our Things We Said Today Facebook page. So,
Yes.
for this really fun discussion on Tug of War, special thanks to our co-hosts for the show, Steve Marinucci and Allan Kozinn, Al Sussman, and our special guest, Tom Frangione. Thanks so much for joining us for Things We Said Today, and we will see you next time.